Most lives are built on a series of supporting pillars: career, health, and spiritual certainty. The true breaking point arrives when those pillars don't fail one by one, but shatter all at once. Michael lived by a specific logical code. He viewed faith as a transaction. If he provided the correct inputs, consistent hard work, daily prayer, and a moral life, the world was supposed to return a predictable output of stability and protection. He poured years of labor into this equation, waking before the sun to work construction and saving every cent to build a home. For Michael, these efforts were more than just chores. He was engineering a shield to keep his mother and sister safe from the world's volatility. Then the math stopped working. His job vanished when the company closed. His savings evaporated into medicine for his sick mother. One by one, the doors he knocked on stayed shut. The shield he had spent his life building simply ceased to exist. When the transactional model fails, it leaves behind a specific kind of silence. If the formula of do good and receive good is broken, it forces a question that strikes at the core of a person's identity. If God isn't holding up his end of the deal, does he still care? Michael sat outside in the dark, watching the resources of his life reach zero. Inside, the quiet sounds of his mother's illness were the only thing breaking the night. There is a unique bitterness in realizing you have kept every promise, yet you are still losing everything. Michael had checked every box, fulfilled every moral obligation, and was now being rewarded with a total collapse. He looked toward the sky and demanded a reason. He asked for an explanation of why things were getting worse instead of better. The night remained completely still. No voice answered, no sign appeared. That silence began to erode what was left of his certainty. He lowered his head, feeling the very last of his faith begin to slip away. At absolute rock bottom, the old relationship with the divine is finished. You either walk away from the wreckage entirely, or you find a completely different way to relate to Jesus. The next morning, Michael's prayer changed. He stopped asking for a way out of his life and asked only for the strength to survive the next 12 hours. He began walking without a destination, eventually reaching the edge of town. There, he found an old man whose wooden cart had stalled against a steep incline. Michael was exhausted and hungry, yet he stopped. He stepped into the dirt and shouldered the weight of a stranger's burden, using the last of his physical energy to heave the cart over the ridge. After the cart reached the top, the old man looked at Michael, not as a helper, but as a man who was himself carrying a crushing weight. He pointed Michael toward an old church at the end of the road. By focusing on the weight of another, Michael had unintentionally broken his own internal paralysis. He was no longer a man standing still in his own grief. He was a man in motion, led by a small act of service toward the help he actually needed. The church was old and mostly empty. There were no lights, no music, and no crowds. Only a plain wooden cross stood at the front, catching a single beam of afternoon sun. Michael sat down and finally stopped trying to manage his crisis. He wept, admitting he was out of ideas and out of strength. He reached the point where he had nothing left to offer in exchange for help. He didn't hear a booming voice or receive a job offer. Instead, he felt a quiet, physical peace enter his chest. For the first time in weeks, the noise in his head simply stopped. A single thought replaced his panic. Do not be afraid. Keep walking. It wasn't a solution. It was a command to move. Michael stood up. His bank account was still empty, and his mother was still ill, but the heavy weight of carrying the outcome by himself had been lifted. He had found the strength to take the next step. Michael's journey reveals a shift in how faith actually functions. On the right, we see a relational model. Here, faith acts as a tether, a constant connection that maintains forward momentum through a field of hazards. This tether provides the steadying presence Michael felt in the church. It doesn't remove the sick mother or the job loss. Instead, it allows the person to navigate the obstacles without being destroyed by them. Michael wiped his eyes and walked back into his life. He didn't have the answers yet, but he decided to take one more step. Faith is often misunderstood as the certainty that things will turn out well if we behave correctly. In reality, faith begins when your own resources are gone, and you choose to keep walking simply because you know Jesus is walking with you. When we hit rock bottom and ask for help, the human instinct is to look for a rescue that we can see and touch. We expect the storm to break the moment we finish the prayer. Michael was at that limit. His mother was sick, his house was nearly empty of money, and he had run out of places to ask for a job. He went into an old church, knelt before the cross, and wept. He asked Jesus the question people have asked for centuries: "Where are you?" But the next morning, nothing had changed. His mother was still ill. He still had no income. The world outside his door looked exactly as it had the day before. This creates a difficult gap in our understanding. If the rescue doesn't arrive as a direct, visible answer to the plea, we're left to wonder if the prayer was heard at all, or if we're looking for the miracle in the wrong place. Michael woke up that morning with a different feeling. His problems hadn't disappeared, but he had stopped viewing his current struggle as a dead end. To him, this was now a chapter in a story that wasn't over yet. He went back out to look for work, but with a new approach. He didn't just ask for a job. He asked people if they needed help. He spent the day carrying boxes, cleaning out stores, and repairing fences for whatever honest pay he could find. In the middle of the marketplace, he saw a little boy sitting alone. The child was clearly lost and frightened. Even though Michael was still desperate for a day's wages, he stopped. He spent the next hour walking through the stalls with the boy until they found his mother. When she tried to thank him, Michael simply told her he had done what anyone should do. He didn't see this as a strategic move. He was a man with no money who gave away an hour of his time to help a stranger, choosing to prioritize someone else's crisis over his own. The next morning, the boy's father arrived at Michael's house. He owned a construction company and had been looking for someone he could trust. Because of what he'd heard about the marketplace, he offered Michael a job. Michael returned to the church that evening. As he knelt where he had cried only days before, he realized that the money he needed hadn't just fallen from the sky. The miracle didn't start with a change in his bank account. It started with a change in him. The answer to his prayer was the new strength that allowed him to act differently in the same difficult world. He had found the patience to work for days with no guarantee of pay. He had found the courage to keep asking for work after being rejected. And he had found the compassion to see a child's fear through the fog of his own stress. Often, the silence we mistake for an ignored prayer is actually a period of growth. We are being prepared to handle the very things we've been asking for. Months passed. Michael became a skilled builder. His mother's health improved, and his family was finally stable. But he hadn't forgotten the feeling of having nothing. Before building himself a better home, he went back to the church where he had once felt so alone. The roof was leaking and the walls were cracked. He used his own earnings to repair the damage. He replaced the broken benches and fixed the roof. He spent his free time restoring the very place where he had once asked where God was. He wasn't just fixing a building. He was honoring the site of his transformation, turning a place of past despair into a place of present sanctuary. Eventually, a massive storm hit the town, causing floods that drove families from their homes. People were left outside in the cold, desperately searching for a safe place to stay. Michael stood in the middle of this new crisis, but the fear he'd felt months earlier was gone. He knew exactly what to do. He opened the doors of the restored church. He brought people inside, gave them blankets, and distributed food. He stayed awake all night, making sure everyone was safe. There is a profound irony in this moment. The man who once begged for someone to save him had become the person saving his entire community. Faith is trusting the process when you don't have the answers. Your hardest seasons aren't wasted. They are the forge where your pain is turned into a source of strength for everyone around you.
Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're diving straight into a deeply moving explainer. Really, it's a modern parable about suffering, hope, and what it actually means to navigate the absolute darkest chapters of our lives. We're going to explore what it looks like to genuinely walk with Jesus through life's biggest storms, and in the process, we're going to redefine what we expect from our faith when we need it the most. Seriously, have you ever felt completely, utterly forgotten when the storm hits? I mean, we've all done that, right? You're standing there looking at the total wreckage of your plans, your hopes, maybe it's your finances or your health, and you're just asking, Why me? It's such a universal human feeling to pray for a lifeline and feel like you're only being met with total silence. Well, today let's look at a story that directly addresses that exact pain with some incredible empathy. Section 1: The Storm and the Aftermath. So our story drops us right in with a man named Michael, immediately following a devastating storm that has just ripped through his town. The winds have finally died down, but, the damage is already done. As the text reads, the streets were covered with water and mud, but the people were alive. Picture this. Michael is standing outside the local church, just watching the morning sunrise. An old man is standing beside him, and he notices something. He looks at Michael and says, "You look different." And Michael smiles and replies, "I am different." See, Michael didn't just survive the storm physically. He was fundamentally changed by a really profound realization he had while those winds were howling. Section 2: Redefining Faith in Jesus. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it totally flips our usual thinking. This is Michael's paradigm-shifting realization. See, so often we buy into this common belief that Jesus removes every problem. We kind of think that if we just have enough faith, Jesus is going to act as this magic shield to keep all the bad things away. But Michael discovered a new, incredibly empowering truth. Jesus is beside me while I walk through the problem. Faith isn't a get-out-of-the-storm-free card. It's the absolute assurance of his companionship right there in the middle of it. And the crucial point is summarized perfectly right here. Silence does not mean abandonment. Wow. Actually, let's fast forward a little bit in the story. Years pass. Michael ends up becoming quite successful. He builds a beautiful home, his family heals, they thrive. But the cool thing is, he never loses his humility. He just keeps helping people. Well, one day, a young man comes to Michael. He's unemployed, he's lost his home, and he is just utterly devoid of hope. He tells Michael, "I have prayed, but nothing has changed." He felt like Jesus had completely, 100% forgotten him. Michael looks at this guy, recognizes that exact same pain he once saw in his own reflection, and shares this profound piece of wisdom. Jesus didn't forget you. He was teaching you how to walk. Section 3: Navigating the Waiting Season. Okay, this brings us to what is honestly probably the hardest part of any journey: the waiting season. That agonizing stretch of time when you pray but you literally see no answer. But the text gives us these brilliant natural metaphors to understand this silent middle part of the story. Think about it. First, a seed grows underground long before anyone ever sees a sprout. Second, the sunrise actually begins to lighten the sky before the heavy darkness fully disappears. And third, your breakthrough develops while you are still waiting. Jesus is working in places you can't see. He's opening doors you can't even imagine. And most importantly, he is giving you strength. Strength to wake up, strength to pray, strength to keep walking, even when you feel like absolutely nothing is happening. I really want to pause and just anchor on this for a second. Your failure is absolutely not your identity. Those closed doors, the empty wallets, the painful chapters, the sickness, the rejection, these are not the end of the book. As the text beautifully notes, your current situation is literally just a chapter, and every difficult chapter is leading towards something you cannot yet see. It doesn't dictate your future, and it certainly does not define who you are. Section 4: Taking the Next Step. Let's move to and see how this builds, because knowing all of this is great in theory, right? But how do we actually apply it when we're hurting? Well, Michael maps out these exact, actionable directives for surviving the wait. 1. Pray. 2. Work. 3. Keep your heart kind. 4. Help someone. And 5. Don't give up. Notice how incredibly simple this is. You don't need to control the entire journey. You don't even need to understand the entire road today. You just need to manage your immediate actions. Trusting Jesus with the next step just means focusing on what is right in front of you. Naturally, the young man pushes back, and we get this incredible rapid-fire Q&A between them. The young man asks, "But what if nothing changes?" Michael says, "Then take another step. And if you're still afraid, take the step while you're afraid. And if you fall, get up. And if you fall again, get up again." You can really feel the tension escalating here, but Michael resolves it with this relentless, unyielding resilience. Your job isn't to guarantee the outcome. Your job is just to keep moving. Section 5: The Greatest Miracle. When we're right in the thick of a crisis, we completely misunderstand how divine intervention works. True faith is definitely not just pretending that everything is perfectly fine. The source text here encourages absolute honesty. If your heart is broken, tell Jesus. If you are terrified or exhausted, tell him. You don't need perfect, polished words. Validating that the exhaustion, the fear, and the broken hearts are all a real, totally acceptable part of the journey is absolutely crucial. True faith is believing that even when everything is falling apart and everything is very much not okay, you are still not alone.
And that brings us to this absolutely profound reframing of what we're actually praying for. A miracle isn't necessarily the storm just vanishing into thin air. It's discovering you became stronger walking through it. This is delivered so powerfully in the text. One day, you might look back at this exact difficult season and realize the very thing you thought was breaking you was actually preparing you. The struggle is teaching you faith. The tears, they're teaching you compassion. The darkness is teaching you how to recognize the light. Michael thought his life was completely falling apart, but years later he realized Jesus was putting the pieces together all along.
So the question is, will you take one more step? Stand up, wipe your tears, take a deep breath, and just take one more step. Your dream isn't necessarily dead, and your worst day absolutely does not decide your future. The light is still there, and Jesus is still right there with you. Remember, your story is still being written, and with Jesus beside you, the darkest night will never be the end.